Appendix 1, R. Buckminster Fuller, Primary Sources on World Game. 1. Critical Path, World Game and Geoscope chapters. The strongest document on World Game in paperback and ebook. 2. World Games Series, Document 1, a useful guide prepared by Fuller's students, longhand, World Game on Google Books. 3. Utopia or Oblivion, the World Game, How to Make the World Work, transcribed from spoken lectures. 4. Education Automation, Emergent Humanity, Its Environment, Education. World Game in the Context of a Vision of Future Education. 5. Earth Inc., 10 Proposals for Improving the World, Theoretical Exploration through World Game. 1 of 10 highly compressed global recommendations. 6. World Design Science Decade documents. The World Design Science Decade was a challenge issued by Fuller to all the world's universities regarding giving credit for classes aimed at making the world work through design science. 7. Energy, Earth, and Everyone, and Hoping, Food for Everyone, 2 books prepared by Medard Gable, longhand. 8. The 1969 New York Studio School seminar recordings, a series of 10 episodes showing longhand classroom World Game. 9. It is possible Stanford could eventually digitize the entire Buckminster Fuller archive, somewhat like Einstein's. This would be a huge windfall of World Game scholarship. There are currently 454 hits when searching for World Game at the guide to the R. Buckminster Fuller papers, M1090. Appendix II, Prototype Report. Introduction. It could be that the World Game, which I've been developing here, may become the whole curriculum of the university itself. R. Buckminster Fuller. I remember first encountering this quote freshman year of college when I watched the World of Buckminster Fuller DVD over and over on a tiny little screen someone gave me as a gift, hoping to get a sense of direction now that I was living away from home in a dorm room. And I wondered, was Fuller serious when he said his computer game could be completely integrated with academic life? Fast forward 10 years later to me as a graduate student. For some reason, this World Game idea had really got a hold on me. I applied to UC Santa Cruz with the explicit intention of doing my thesis on the subject. And all of a sudden, I found myself with an opportunity to explore this so-called World Game with a games expert as the final project for a graduate class called Playable Media. I've always loved sports, especially ultimate frisbee. I even played for my college team as a bench warmer. I had fun during practice. While video games are still getting a foothold in our everyday lives, sports have always been part and parcel with my entire educational experience. So I thought to myself, I think there's a convergence here worth exploring. I could be wrong about the whole thing, but where else to take risks and push boundaries than college? A little departure from Fuller, I thought. It could be that the World Game which I've been developing may become a college sport. There are mathletes and knowledge bowls, even Jeopardy, and yet these are sports for the brain as a memory muscle. Where are the sports for the brain as a creative muscle? As a problem-solving game? Indeed, there are programming competitions for computer enthusiasts, hackathons. And in fact, I joined my college computer programming team, as is consistent with my track record of interests. However, these events are often highly specialized or about solving known problems. The adults know the answers. Where can I go to be a part of the front lines of solving comprehensive global challenges? I think there is a gap here that needs bridging. And I think there is a unique opportunity in using the well-established channel of college sports as a way to have students and professors participate in their own self-education in gaming the host of unsolved global problems. With no other options before me, I would simply have to invent the game I've wanted my whole life, and so I gave it a shot. Describing the prototype. World Game Prototype Overview. So, how was I going to create a sport? about world-scale problem-solving principles from nothing? Well, most sports seem to not require much more equipment other than a ball of some sort to play. And yet, people don't seem to learn a lot of world-scale problem-solving principles from ball games, or any contemporary games for that matter. Luckily, there is a kind of game, not usually thought of as a sport, which is allied with the equipment of education, pen and paper. Simple enough, these games are known as pen and paper games, or in this case, tabletop RPGs. My working motivation had been to not wait for some far-off future to establish World Game as a university sport. When I took a step back and looked at the big picture, I saw academics as a bit like a pen and paper game. I wondered, could I take advantage of this and make a game out of the written word that would be appropriate for academics to play during their work hours? Tabletop RPGs make a game out of language in the same way that football makes a game of an oval-shaped ball. Universities are a remarkable resource of problem-solving knowledge, and games are a very powerful and extremely popular way of giving people a fun way to develop those problem-solving skills. Universities also happen to be a home of the tremendous institution in the form of college sports that has been a big part of university culture for a long time. Furthermore, in games, there is always a standardization of experience, which is necessary for use at world scale. People would never even consider the possibility of professional sports in which basic rules are even slightly different from location to location. Fortunately, all university departments have one thing in common: problem solving. A problem-solving game with a single rule set could unite all education disciplines and all universities. To this end, World Game could be a tabletop RPG played as a unifying university sport globally. All students and teachers could share in a common group experience of World Game according to their appetites. If right now all I have to give is the written word, then I must be careful about the words I choose. An academic language game could become a world-scale problem-solving engine. Writing, when thought of as a cognitive technology, is indistinguishable from magic. At the same time, the written word seems to be insufficient for solving contemporary world-scale problems, such as climate change. Therefore, our culture of writing must evolve such that the programmed word becomes the lingua franca for world-scale problem-solving wherever digital media are demonstrably superior to analog media. This could engender an enlightened society in which human needs are met in concert with the needs of the earth. Every day I say to myself, it will be software, not speeches, that will coordinate the necessary global harmony for this set of problems, because software is language lockstep with action. World Game has been entirely verbal without much of a solid form, and eventually it will take the form of computer interfaces. However, like going from a book to a movie, World Game will need to be written in playable language, written in a prescriptive language, rather than the descriptive language that Fuller left us before being written in computing language. Simply put, World Game needs a rule book for pen and paper play. And like books and movies, an ecology would exist between a computer world game and a human world game. I thought to myself, we have with us today all the components for creating a synergy that could solve critical problems before us. Language is evolving, games are increasingly everywhere, universities are already everywhere. Global university education allows for the possibility of generalized problem solving at world scale. And the internet ties it all together today. A game of the language arts and the software arts. The computer revolution can be envisioned as a rewriting of the world. The software arts is an examination of computerization as a work of rewriting, or more specifically as translation. Increasingly, in academia, industry, and government contexts, ideas are exchanged as software rather than as printed prose documents. Software now constitutes a new form of logic, rhetoric, and grammar, a new means of thinking, arguing, and interpreting. The software arts is a study of information technology as a technology of language, and an understanding of software and software composition as a language art. The argument is that the foundational ideas and practices of computing come from the arts, specifically from a coupling of the liberal and the mechanical arts. Dr. Warren Sack. In designing my game, I wanted to see if language was as magical as I thought it was. Today, the world is dependent upon the written word as a means of formal consensus. Birth is made formal through the birth certificate. Legal documents make formal agreements between individuals and society. Humans sign their lives away. The dominance of the written word is inarguable. However, this fact is evolving. Tomorrow, the world will also be dependent upon a new form of written word. Programming language takes the written word and enforces a meta layer of unambiguous grammar through the medium of the compiler, which ensures a level of objectivity unattainable in a world without computers. The written word has had such dominance because the written word can create objectivity between parties. The words on the page are the words on the page, and the main room for error lies in the subjective interpretation of the words on the page, demanding good diction and maximally unambiguous language. Our thoughts are abstract and invisible. For multiple parties to come together and have their thoughts fit together geometrically, we need a medium to act as the ground truth, the wellspring of reality. For the written word, parties must be on the same page about interpretations in order to find mutual satisfaction. The fact is, programming languages can add stronger objectivity by removing the room for error in the interpretation of the words on the page. A compiler acts as a neutral, objective third party, which rigidly adheres to a singular, unambiguous representation of information in the form of a computer grammar. Therefore, I supposed programming language must come to see dominance over formal consensus protocols requiring strict adherence to terms of agreement. Given the power of writing, especially establishing world game in natural language could be useful in making the software transition overall. We must use the written word in order to adopt the computed word. My quest for world game, the word game, could make possible world game, the programming word game. World game, tabletop RPG, as a playable medium. On a rather different note, to return to the idea of role-playing, I've also been talking recently with Pat Harrington, my co-editor for First Person, about the fact that computer-based role-playing games don't capture much of what we most enjoy about tabletop role-playing games. This is true both for the single-player adventure games on computers and the massively multiplayer games. It's the pre-play construction, much as the play itself, that I enjoy about tabletop RPG systems. The thinking about the possibilities created by those systems and constructing fictional elements within them. Perhaps this is analogous to what Will Wright talks about when he says that he came to his type of design through the realization that the terrain editor for his last traditional pre-sim game, Raid on Bungling Bay, was more interesting than the combat-oriented play that took place over the terrain. I think there's a future in making that more construction-oriented element of RPGs something the computer provides an environment for playing in a new way. And of course, I'm particularly interested in how this might play out in a way in which language is central. Perhaps it goes without saying, but it was the interaction of written and spoken language with the mechanics of a system that first drew me into tabletop RPGs when I was 8, and a friend showed me a copy of the Dungeons and Dragons rules. Dr. Noah Wardrop Fruman. Yes, writing is powerful, yet a book is not exactly playable. Tabletop RPGs are playable media, which are uniquely suited to the rhythmic claims of freedom and discipline. When I implemented my playable prototype, there were 3 things I kept in mind. 1. I must maintain the bar Fuller set for himself. The way I solved this was by studying the World Game source materials, Appendix I. With the benefit of the Fuller Estate's facilitation. 2. I must maintain world scale. The way I solved this was by embracing computationally based media experiences and imagining a meta tabletop RPG being played on the metal tabletop of the internet. 3. I must maintain playability. The way I solved this was by taking the world scale university model of A syllabi, B teachers, C students, and combining this with the aforementioned world-scale tabletop RPG model of D campaigns, E game facilitators, F role players. Because a university seemed to be similar to a giant tabletop RPG, a tabletop RPG seemed to be similar to a tiny university. My idea was that World Game as a tabletop RPG could become a problem-solving college sport globally, a real world game. World Game could be something done during school hours rather than as an after-school program. Tabletop RPG mechanics are fairly simple as a set of principles. People read the documents. A friend showed me a copy of the Dungeons and Dragons rules and decide if they want to play. In order to play, the documents are fairly self-explanatory, with the sine qua non being a game of the written and spoken word. The interaction of written and spoken language with the mechanics of a system. In this system, the mechanics of World Game's prototype tabletop RPG system is as a problem-solving engine. First, get yourself together on pen and paper. Second, get the world together on pen and paper. Third, bridge whatever gap with the rest of one's own life. My prototype documents attempted to assist in these regards by creating a game model which is learnable and actionable. To be learnable, a player must be able to make inferences about a game state and build up a mental image or model of the underlying system as they interact with the rules of the game. This may not mean that they are able to completely reverse engineer the system. Rather, a learnable computational model is one supporting the incremental development of simplified and partial mental models that successfully provide guidance for future exploration and interaction within the game rule system. This exploration is afforded through mechanisms of engagement. That is, a means for a player to affect the state of the game in a manner consistent with his or her desires. To meet this requirement, the game must also be actionable. Defining games as systems that employ such models distinguishes them from traditional systems and computational models in other disciplines, such as physics or engineering, where cognitive properties of learnable and actionable are not factors. Dr. Michael Matthias roles to play in World Game Tabletop RPG. Avatars. Avatara. Descending or going down into. Any distinguished person who in the language of respect is called an avatara or incarnation of a deity. The Practical Sanskrit-English Dictionary. In many ways, the self is the most real thing for a person, and yet the self can be physically extended beyond the body through artifacts of language, and language can run amok. There's already a database, actually many databases, which purport to know who you are. Governments maintain a database on their citizens, corporations maintain a database on their potential customers, and a social media profile is a database purporting to represent people. It would be nice if folks had total control over where they appear in the world and how their appearance is managed, as they have control over their own bodies. That would be a great public service. I designed the prototype to empower players to take the already in place framework the world uses to pigeonhole people, write down their name, age, marital status, generally IRS type form filling, and thereafter think about the successes and failures of how they're being represented in the world. This was in contradistinction to a fantasy construction. I chose this non-fictional design to emphasize the extraordinary reality of the way that the world currently works, with special reference to the way the world also fails at its job of working. If players wanted a role to play in World Game, my design was to have them role play themselves, and in the process further their own self-realization. Over time, and at scale, with enough correct data, it is possible humanity may discover enormous patterns of nature are playing out in which each person is a link in the blockchain of irreplaceable importance. Furthermore, a standardized character sheet would allow for party balancing mechanics found in these more traditional games. Doing work in the world often requires comprehensive skill sets spread out among a team of people. Having some kind of at-a-glance format which immediately identifies the roles a person is suitable to play would allow for quick formation of groups capable of generalized problem solving. Ultimately, it was an attempt to give players a common ground and shared language for their time in the game, and a chance to reaffirm an answer to the timeless question of, who am I? Things to do in World Game, tabletop RPG, problem solve. I also included in the prototype a problem-solving guide. After having come to some terms of agreement with their internal problem-solving through the avatar, it was time for the players to step out into the world and grapple with the external problem-solving of planet Earth. In order to shoulder some of the burden for the players, I attempted to provide in the guide a comprehensive overview of the world's unsolved problems. World Game, as a framework, is meant to be a problem-solving engine, and this is also true for the tabletop RPG. World hunger, poverty, crime, war, environmental destruction, education, there are problems enough to go around for a long time. The general goal for the problem guide was to facilitate the players' thinking about the world. First, the player got to situate themselves in the world through the avatar. Then the player got to situate the world in reference to them through the problem guide. Between creating themselves on paper and creating the world on paper, there was a game in the space of the self in relationship to the world, which was greatly aided by the written word as an anchor for objective thinking. It is also a way to do statistics maintenance, which is a fundamental aspect of many playable media, and also a fundamental aspect of life. Ultimately, in terms of playability, I asked the players to submit a written proposal of a solution to a problem of their choosing in the context that the planet is in a dangerously fragile state due to the critical conditions humanity has imposed on the Earth through unsustainable resource use patterns. Start World Game with world scale. With a few simple ingredients, individuals can achieve unprecedented impact with speed and scale. Language plus games plus the internet equals World Game Tabletop RPG prototype. Universities already exist world over. Using the internet and the love of games could feasibly unite all academics, as is already the case in the unity of athletics. A unified academic front could solve the world's problems. My game was fairly simple in principle. I used the internet to upload a downloadable file on an online server. In truth, this could be accessed globally and therefore be an around-the-world game. In practice, I had a group of people who agreed to beta test my game in a controlled setting and provide critical feedback within the context of a larger graduate course. The final file on the online server was a single document consisting of 31 pages and 7,804 words. The document had as contents: introduction, avatar guide, avatar template, avatar example, problem-solving guide, problem-solving template, problem-solving example, implementation section, discussion section. Besides reading the files, the main action to be done was to fill out the avatar template and the problem-solving template, or invent a new template. That's all. Just 2 writing exercises shared on the internet was the minimum of the game. The maximum of the game was to process the lifetime's worth of consideration that concerns the self and the world. At the end of it all, perhaps a physics major would decide to install solar panels on campus, much the same as would happen in a university class, project, or thesis. My prototype was an attempt to take a facet of the university experience, package it as a game, and transform the academic stakes into the stakes found in World Games win condition. To make the world work. No grades were given, yet if something like my World Game writing exercise is not done, the logical extension is the world will not work. For our species, the look and feel of my game was intended to be like a graduate seminar, or a situation room, or a think tank, etc. Instead of casting magical spells in a make-believe setting, I simply asked players to focus on the world and ask themselves how they could make the world work for real.